Hello and welcome to the Deviants Tour San Francisco edition. I am here today with my friend, the actor Johnny Sibley. And before we get into introductions and also a word from our co-host, Terry from the GLBT Historical Society, I did want to take a pause for a second because I would be remiss not to acknowledge the pain that our nation is feeling amidst the loss of Black lives at the hands of our nation's law enforcement. So to any Black folks who may be watching, your lives matter. To my predominantly white fans, we must do better. I've posted a link in our Crowdcast description for those who are hoping to make a difference for our friends who identify as QTPOC. In the meantime, please join me for a moment of silence to honor the lives of Tony McDade, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, and too many others. Thank you. And now I'm going to pass the speaking stick to Terry Beswick, who last time we chatted was on another panel called Pandemic Sex. Is that right? And from the GLBT Historical Society, who can talk a bit about the great work they do. Terry, thank you so much for co-hosting this.
Thank you so much, Eric, for inviting us to co-host tonight. And I'm just delighted to be part of this. And I hope that a lot of people are watching on Facebook. I think I'm really excited to watch later myself. And after I do that, I'm going to hop off and just go onto Facebook, if that's okay, to watch.
Sure.
And I'm looking forward to reading everything that you guys are talking about tonight. So the Historical Society, I just want to talk a little bit about us. It's Pride Month. And we were founded in 1985 in San Francisco, and really at the beginning of the AIDS epidemic, when so many gay men, and especially in San Francisco, were dying, and their belongings and their personal memorabilia were being lost, by their friends and their family, and things were being tossed. And there were a lot of queer historians and community historians who came together and formed this organization. And the purpose of it was really not just to preserve our the people who had died of AIDS and their materials, but all across the full spectrum of the LGBTQ community, especially focusing on Northern California, to collect our history. So we now have one of the largest archives of queer historical materials anywhere in the world here in downtown San Francisco. And we also have a small museum in the Castro district. Both of those are currently closed to the public. We're hoping to open in mid-August, but in the meantime, please check out our website, go online. We have a lot of great resources, archival resources. We just put up a bunch of online collections actually today that are really cool to look at, as well as exhibits and events. And so for the month of June, also, I just want to make a quick pitch that we're doing a special on our membership. For $35 for the whole year, you can get a whole set of benefits. Just go to our website. It's really our bread and butter that sustains the historical work that we do throughout the year. So if you go to glbthistory.org/members, check it out. And with that, I just want to introduce, for those who don't know, my friend, Dr. Eric Scavini. He's an award-winning historian of LGBTQ+ politics and culture. He graduated summa cum laude from Harvard College and received his PhD in history from the University of Cambridge, where he was a Gates Scholar, and I'm a big fan. Johnny Sibley is an actor, producer, and advocate based in Los Angeles. In 2018, Sibley made waves with his role of Costas Perez on FX's groundbreaking show Pose, created by Ryan Murphy. Sibley is an ardent champion for Latinx and LGBTQ+ rights, and has grown a sizable following online, known for his progressive and comedic voice. And I'm a big fan of yours as well, Johnny. And so I'm really excited about tonight's conversation. Thank you so much for having me, and good luck with your work.
Thank you so much, Terry.
Thank you.
All right, so I'm gonna press I'm gonna let you watch on Facebook. So so long, Johnny. Thank you so much for joining. I was telling Terry right before this that most book tours is just an author sitting there reading from their own book, and they get very bored. And I persuaded my publisher to kind of turn it on its head, because I think, of course, I do want to give a shout out to also to Green Apple Books in San Francisco. If you click the little green button, they couldn't be here to talk tonight, but I do want to say how important independent bookshops are, especially now in this political and cultural moment, for us to be having conversations like this. They are so crucial. So if you haven't gotten the book yet, please consider getting it from them. But Johnny, you and I know each other mostly because through Adam, my boyfriend, but also we are in a book club together. And usually it's just us sitting talking about other books, which, as I said, I get a little bored. But I also wanted to take the moment to kind of talk about you, because I know a lot of actors are watching, a lot of people who, are big fans of yours. So again, thank you so much for joining.
Of course, I wouldn't miss it. Yeah, thank you for having me.
So rather than kind of getting into like the book itself, I wanted, I haven't really had the chance, I guess, in our book club or anything, to kind of get back to the basics and go back in time and ask, tell me about your story. I think people would love to hear how you first started acting and how that path started, eventually getting you onto the amazing show Pose.
Yeah. I started acting in school in, I think it was 7th grade. My mom pushed me to be in acting like class, because we had like a camcorder at home, and I would like use it every day, like filming my sister doing random things, making music videos. So she's like, you should channel that into like something creative. And at first I was like, well, I want to be in band, but I picked drama instead, and it's the best thing I ever did for myself. But yeah, being a queer kid, that was my outlet, my saving grace, as were books. It's funny that I kind of learned about sexuality within my own like queer identity by reading books, not queer books, but reading books where you'd hear about heterosexual sex and things like that. And I just remember like feeling certain ways about certain books, and then when joining the drama club, I just really stepped into who I was little by little, because I was a very shy kid. When I was like 3, 4, I was like rambunctious and crazy, and then when school started, I just like clammed up. And yeah, I never stopped acting through high school, college. And in college, my acting teacher said, if you want to be an actor, go to New York, and then eventually head out to LA. So that's exactly the trajectory that I've been on.
So you mentioned, reading, and what the conversation I had right before this was with Eric Thomas, who he read a little bit from his own book, which is phenomenal, by the way. And it was about how, he worked in a library, and before he knew he was gay, he would still look in the library database and type gay and see what came up. So I'm curious if you were writing or reading straight stories, what kind of helped you still figure out your own sexuality and identity?
I think it was because I remember they were books that were highly sexual. Like I don't know if it was Joan Collins or no, it was Jackie Collins. They were like some of my stepmom's books that were in my room at my dad's house when I would go visit, and I was like, oh, I wonder what this is, and I would read it, and then that catapulted me into going to Barnes and Noble, because I lived in a suburb, so we didn't really have smaller bookstores, which I wish we did, because I feel like I would have had like a kind of connection with the people there. But I used to go to the bookstore all the time and like creep over to the gay section or the lifestyle section, as they would call it in some stores, and just like peek, either after school or when my mom was picking up some Christian book upstairs, I was, doing what I had to do, and like seeing the magazines and stuff. And it was just a very interesting time to like explore everything so secretly. But that's basically how I learned what my sexuality was before the internet even.
Yeah, yeah. I don't. I wish I remember having that one book that was like teaching about like puberty and things like that, and that was like the only book I knew about. I didn't even know there was a gay section. Like I don't think I could have even named it.
Yeah.
So I think that was like just like looking at the diagrams was like the most I had, and wasn't the most like titillating of things.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
and this was in Miami, right?
This was in Miami, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So did you come out pretty early, or how?
Yeah, I think I was, well, I came out a couple times, but I was pushed back into the closet, you know, as so many of us are with, you know, this is just a phase and this, that, and the other. But I officially came out when I was in my senior year of high school, because I remember getting my heart broken and I just like, you know, sulking for weeks on end until they were like, you know, what's wrong with you? I was like, I was in love with a boy. And then I was like, this is who I am. And, you know, but yeah, coming out was if I didn't have drama, I wouldn't have had the confidence to come out.
Oh, interesting. How so? Is it because it just kind of made things less scary when you're on a stage in front of people?
Yeah, I mean, being on stage, like I can disappear into a character and that's exciting, but it also gives me the confidence to know that I can do something bigger than myself, to be on stage or whatnot. It's kind of like, you know, when I came out, it's like I had to have a speech. I had to like say what I wanted to say. I had to rehearse it. I had to, you know, wait a week before I was ready to like do it. And it's the same thing. I was rehearsing every other day after school, and I just finally got the chutzpah to just say, this is who I am. And you might not like it, but it is what it is. You know?
Yeah, amen. Yeah. And I always hear, I can't remember who originally said it, but that gay people make the best actors because for so much of their lives, they're acting as straight, which is hard to do. It is for me, or it was. So it's a good rehearsal.
Oh, 100%. Code switching 101.
Yeah. Okay, so tell me about, you know, you moved to New York, and what is your path to pose? How, because that's how, certainly how I know you, at least on the screen. What were the steps that got you there?
Well, it's funny, when I got to New York, I like started doing extra work and doing like hitting the ground running, like, you know, being on shows like Law and Order and Smash and just bit parts here and there, just like working my way up the ladder. And then I joined this acting class in New York called Act Out, which was primarily built for queer actors. And, you know, so the class was just filled with different types of queer people, transgender, nonconforming, queer men, queer women, like just everyone, just a mix of people. And we were finally able, because in drama class in school and college, you never really discover or like dissect what it means to be a queer character, like fully realize. So that class, I met a lot of amazing people in that class. Laverne Cox was in that class. My best friend Trace Lissette was in that class. This is where I met these people. We were going to the same classes. And I remember moving in with Trace Lissette, who is an actress, and she is also on Pose. She's been on Pose a couple times, but we became roommates, and you know, we went to class every other day, and we'd go home, and I learned so much about the ballroom scene from her, because she is a ballroom girl. She started very early on in her New York life. So I learned so much. We'd stay up watching clips of people in the ballroom. So I've always had a deep respect for the ballroom community. And, you know, back when I lived in Miami, I had seen Paris is Burning. And I remember back then, I'm like, why is there not a show about this? Like this, it's so rich. There's so many amazing characters. We deserve story. And this was right around the time Glee was like at its height. So I was, you know, self-proclaimed Gleek at that time. I used to have Gleeks United Tuesdays, where everyone would come over to my house and we'd just watch, you know, because for us queer people, there's not a lot of things that we have that are ours. So we really just gravitate to any little things that we see ourselves in. So after that, I remember I was with Trace and we got the like deadline notification that said Ryan Murphy was going to make a show called Pose based on the ballroom scene. And I just remember thinking to myself, this would be amazing. Like, so I emailed my agent right away. I'm like, I don't know how, I don't care what I will do in this show. I just want to be a part of the show somehow. And luckily the casting director had cast me for The Deuce on HBO, like a couple months earlier, or a year earlier. And so they called me in. I read for 3 different roles, and Costas was the 3rd role and the one that I got. So
amazing. I mean, like,
felt like serendipitous, like everything just like fell into place for like some way.
And I was just reminded, because someone did submit a question. Anyone who's watching either on Facebook or in Crowdcast, submit your questions for either one of us. We have allotted the last 20 or 25 minutes for it. So please, no matter whether it's about Hollywood, Pose, Johnny, me, the book, the world, ask us questions. But anyways, I did want to take a step back also because you mentioned ballroom culture, which is something that I've studied a bit as a historian, but I'm sure you got to know quite a bit just through the show. So I was wondering, for people who might not know what ballroom culture is or what Pose is, could you give them a little bit of a teaser of what that means?
Yeah, I like to say ballroom is like that group of friends that you had, if you had that group, where you would just gravitate toward each other because you were so alike and you weren't judged, especially if you were a queer kid. I had other queer friends that I didn't know were queer, but we kind of just found each other. So ballroom is kind of like that utopia that people seek out, where you could just be anything that you want to be. And all these categories that ballroom has, whether it's like, walking face or voguing, these are all things that you can fall into and just give your heart and soul to and be that famous person or that icon or legend, as they call it, in this community. And people are revered and respected and loved, whereas if they were outside of the community, they might not be accepted with the same kind of love and acceptance. So it's really all about chosen family. And that's why I think a lot of ballroom culture is so it's very tricky because it's become very mainstream, and a lot of people still in ballroom culture don't have the kind of resources that you would see on these TV shows and things like that. So it's still very much a living, breathing thing, and people are still affected by all the things going on in the world, but this is still their safe place, and it's something to be respected and lauded for sure.
Yeah, and I'll be the first to admit, I came out, 10 years ago, and what I knew about RuPaul and Drag Race, and then works backwards, right? Because I became a historian after coming out, after learning about, Drag Race. And you think that anything that is happening in current events or in popular culture must be new. But then you work your way backwards and you realize, wait a second, Ru is constantly referencing Paris is Burning. And so then you watch Paris is Burning, you're like, oh my gosh. And then you say, wait a second, where did that come from? And then you realize that's been around since the very beginning of the 20th century. And the balls in Harlem in the 20s had thousands of people. Like these as masquerade balls were absolutely gigantic, something you don't really see now. And you realize, wait a second, that, what are we losing also in history as things become more popular?
100%, yeah.
So that's why one thing I love about Pose, though, is that it shows just how rich and vibrant and exciting and diverse ballroom culture was in the 80s, without forgetting about the history even before that.
Right.
So I also wanted to take a moment because I mentioned the last panel I was on with Terry from the GLBT Historical Society was about sex and pandemic, and Terry was actually very involved in ACT UP and AIDS activism. And so your character is an AIDS patient who's hospitalized, right, Costas. And so I'm wondering if you could tell us just a little bit about that experience of playing that character, and also what you may have learned about, you know, the AIDS crisis during that era.
Yeah. I think so. When I was in that acting class, the one that I told you about, the Act Out, it was actually in the LGBT Center of New York, where they have the Keith Haring paintings and used to be the St. Vincent's Hospital and whatnot. So every class at the end, we would gather around in a circle, and the acting coach would say, "This is for the people that died in this space, the ones that aren't with us anymore." So you would just feel this like vibrational thing. So when this role came across, it just felt like I just felt like I really wanted to just do it justice, in the sense that all those classes and all the years that I've like put into trying to be comfortable and love who I am, like I wanted to respect the people that came before me, even if they aren't here anymore. So, and getting ready for the role, I was like, you know, I really want to do the right thing and research, and especially because, you know, there's a lot of like movies, and I'm a very visual person, and, you know, seeing a lot of documentaries and even YouTubing things like that, I didn't see a lot of stories about people of color or Latinx people, you know, and they're out there. You just have to look a little harder. But most of the stories that I would find were of white gay men that were dying of AIDS. And I was like, well, what about the ballroom kids? Like what was happening with them? So I dug a little deeper, and, you know, luckily the ballroom community has some good archives on YouTube of, you know, some of the elders that lived through it that were able to talk about it. And I watched a bunch of videos of trans women talking about the AIDS epidemic as well. So I did a lot of research that way, and also, you know, reading the script and seeing things like thrush, you know, which I had no idea what thrush was before that. So I had to, like, you know, Google that and, you know, learn all these things that I live in a privileged space in this moment to not have to know what my forefathers went through. But if anything, this role made me more appreciative of the history, of wondering, like, why is it that I have to go so deep to try and find these stories? Which is why, you know, this book is so great, you know, to tie in your book, because I just think about how amazing it would have been to have this resource at a time when I need it, because it all really does tie into it to itself. Because I remember first getting to New York, I would go to the public library and check out books, and there was this one book in particular about being gay in the military, and I think it was like the 40s, and I was like,
yeah,
I can never remember the name. I'm like, I want to read it again. Like,
it might be Coming Out Under Fire.
I'm gonna write that down, because that might be it.
If it was mostly like World War II, then that was probably it's a wonderful history by Alan I can never say his name, Berube.
But like reading that and like just all of these things, like, and, you know, when I reached out to you about queer literature, and because as an actor, my job is to tell stories, and for me as a queer actor, it's very important for me to tell queer stories. You know, it's nice to play a straight character. You're like, it's fine, but what matters to me is playing characters that we don't get to see, that you know, our forefathers didn't get to see represented in their media as well. So this stuff is super important to me. So playing that character, I just wanted to do it justice by doing the research and providing a level of care to the character.
And it's what you said about it being so difficult to find those stories, I think could not be more true. Especially I write about the 60s. The book is primarily about the 1960s, and the sad part about it is the people who were most active and most involved in the pre-Stonewall gay rights movement they were the ones who passed away from AIDS. The statistics, it's literally, the definition of decimated is 10% being killed. And that's what happened to gay men, not to mention, probably at an even higher level at people who are really ingrained within the community. And so it was really, really difficult to be able to tell the stories because most histories written of the 60s, a lot of them are still around. But unfortunately, so many passed away, especially the younger men in the second wave of pre-Stonewall activists. They're no longer with us. And that's always been my point to fellow queers, especially in this pandemic, is you have to remember that our elders within our community are survivors, and they've already survived, and we have a moral obligation to them to protect them. And so I'm not as worried about me getting sick with this virus. I'm worried about our elders within our community who are the protector of our stories, so that people like you can then tell those stories.
And it wasn't important to me to read a little bit about the pre-AIDS life of a gay man, because how can I fully think about what this character is going through on the bed if all I know is AIDS and afterward? I needed to know how life was freer when it came to sex, and why, because in my head in this day and age, I know about AIDS, I know all the risks, and I don't, but even with COVID is a great example, and I think a lot of queer actors and storytellers going forward will have a little bit of just a small idea of what we don't know, what they're telling us over here, what they're telling us over here. There's news changing every day. That is a big thing that people that are telling these stories have to know. So it's been very interesting, the whole process.
And one group of people who I think their stories have been erased, especially, are trans women of color. And as a historian, I know how crucial they are, not just to history and to Stonewall, but to our rights as gay men now, how essential they were beyond Stonewall. And one thing that I think people who don't watch Pose, and why they should watch it and why it's so amazing, is because very easily Ryan Murphy could have said, oh, let's just get 5 cis actors to play these roles, as has been the case in so many Hollywood productions. So I'm wondering, why is it important, in your opinion, that especially these characters, trans women of color, are playing trans women of color in a historically oriented piece of television?
Absolutely. I always say that when they see us, they have to see us, if that makes sense. Like, it's very easy to watch a movie and see Jake Gyllenhaal play a queer man and be like, oh well, he's not actually queer, that's Jake Gyllenhaal. But when they see me playing, they know that I go home to a man, and that they have to sit with that, because they can't look away and be like, oh, this is just a movie. And the same thing with trans women, and especially trans women of color. There's the statistics are highly against them, when it comes to death rates and things like that. So to see strong trans women of color on screen, these people in our society have to see that they exist, they're real, they are fully realized human beings. And I always use the example, my mom works in the government, and she watched Pose because I was on it, but she didn't, and she asked me afterward, how can I better help trans women in my work? And this happens the same. It's always the test of time. And also to demystify this idea that trans women are not women, and trans men are not men. You have to see them. So if I play a trans woman, then people are going to be like, well, that's a man under whatever costume, But when trans women play trans women and you see them on the cover of Hollywood Reporter or People magazine or whatnot, you know that person is who they are, and they are deserving of that space that they're taking up, and time that they're there.
And I don't think that could be more true. And also, there are so many incredible organizations who are doing that work and who have been doing that work. One thing I always tell people about my own research, and even though the book is mostly about a cis white gay man, as a historian, you have to look beyond that and see and ask the question of who is being forgotten. And in the case of the 60s and early 70s, there is just so much evidence in the archives, in beyond oral histories, but also like literally just the receipts are there. You can point to where, for example, Sylvia Rivera and Marsha P. Johnson, two incredible figures, not just at Stonewall, but afterwards too, creating Star. And I think it's so true that trans women of color, and those therefore with the least to lose, are the first to fight back, and also the first to be forgotten. And I think that's what we need to be doing, that work of saying, okay, who are we forgetting in our past and who are we forgetting now? And those organizations, the organizations I mentioned at the beginning, who are doing such incredible work protecting Black trans lives, especially the Marsha P. Johnson Institute is absolutely phenomenal, and the Sylvia Rivera Law Center. There's links to both if you just press the little I next to the title. And that kind of brings us to our current moment. You and I are both very outspoken and use our platforms. And I wanted to ask you, as someone with an even larger platform, why is it, you think, with the following you do, the fans you do, why is it important to be speaking out, to be saying Black Lives Matter, Black trans lives matter now?
Well, for me, it's always been the right thing to do. And sometimes, Billy Porter actually says, sometimes what's right is not what's popular. And people usually, like we were just talking about Sylvia Rivera and Marsha P. Johnson. Sylvia Rivera was not liked by the community.
Oh my God!
Because she was a rabble rouser, and she said what needed to be said. She's a hero now, but she was not treated very well back then. The same way that right now we have the Black Lives Matter movement, and there are people that forget, want to celebrate Pride and forget that we wouldn't have a Pride if there wasn't protest. We wouldn't have progress if there wasn't protest. So I think for me, speaking up, it's also for me as a queer man who's been told to be silent for most of my life, I cannot be silent anymore. And I live in a space right now where I feel safe, and there's other people that do not feel safe. I don't want anyone to feel how I ever felt, or worse. So it is my duty as someone that has experienced marginalization to make sure that other people don't. And especially, like I always say, most of the women in my life that have given me the voice that I have been trans women and Black women and Hispanic women. These are the women that have made me who I am. And Black people, like this is part of my upbringing. So for me, being loud, and I don't care whose toes I step on, because if I said this like on a story recently, I'm like, if you're not speaking up, because there's this idea that you have to be an activist in order to say what's right, and that you have to get political, and people's existence and worthiness is not up for debate or opinion or political stance. And it's been diluted, that's why I've told family and friends of mine who are, that have been anti-queer. I'm like, I'm not asking for you to accept me. I'm telling you that you're going to have to accept it at some point, because it's coming. You either get on the train or it's going to miss you, And that's how I feel about this moment in time right now. It's like I read a lot of people, and, I know everyone has a different journey, but this idea that, I'm finally seeing It's like, but Black folks have been telling you for so long, and a lot of it's education. I said that the other day that, in schools, a lot of times we teach racism as it was and not as it is now. So people don't have to acknowledge the racism that already festers within their own lives. They think, oh, that racism was wearing a white hood and, and setting people's houses on fire. I don't do that. So I'm not. I couldn't possibly be racist. But racism is a spectrum, and so for me, it's super important. A lot of the people that I love are Black and are trans, and and they deserve to be spoken for. They can't carry the burden all on their own. And I think of people like Sylvia Rivera and how I don't care about being popular or being liked. I just want to do what's right. So if I have even if I had 10 people on my Instagram or Facebook, I've always been someone to speak my mind after I was comfortable and ready. And so I always invite people to use their voice, no matter how small they think their reach is. It doesn't matter. If you reach one person, that's one more person on the side of good.
Amen. And I think one of the moments in the Stonewall moment that I always think about, and some historians have included it, not many people have highlighted it, is a few weeks after Stonewall. It might have been like 7 days or 10 days after. There was a meeting that was called by the Mattachine Society of New York and other activists, and it was actually the meeting where the Gay Liberation Front came. The idea of it first came into being, and one member of the Mattachine who was at that meeting and was very protective of especially the street kids, as they were called, who were essentially, you see them in pose, homeless youth, often sex workers, often trans, who were also on the front lines at Stonewall. And there were reports after Stonewall because the police were completely humiliated, right? They were literally doing chorus lines in high heels, kicking their heels at the police, and keeping them occupied for hours. And so you start seeing these reports of police brutality, of them beating these homeless children. And so one of the members at this meeting stands up and says, hey, we have this police brutality taking place with these homeless kids. I think we should create some sort of like safe house or something for them, maybe a coffee house to protect them. His name's Bob Kohler, is the guy who did this. He was completely ignored. They told him to shut up and sit down because they wanted to plan a march. And so I think it shows that as we have this groundswell, we have this radicalizing moment right now, and people want to do something and they want to be visible and they want to show that they're marching. We have to be asking, who are we forgetting? And thankfully, there are these organizations like the Marsha P. Johnson Institute who are saying, hey, Black trans lives matter, and we need to be saying the names of Tony McDade and Iana Dior, who was just attacked this past Monday. So thank you for bringing that up yourself. And I think we all need to do better.
Yeah, anytime a trans woman is murdered, I'm mind boggled how a lot of queer men that I follow do not speak up. I'm like, what? How are, the news isn't covering it. They get a small byline on a newspaper or a digital article, but this is something that's happening all the time. And the police aren't doing much about it. And, when you really read and you talk, that's what I always tell people. You need trans friends. You need Black friends. You need Hispanic friends. Like you have to get to know people. And it's not only about, oh, I don't want that person to suffer over there. No, that you can be that person's friend and ally and confidant. You don't, that's a lot of the problem, is that people aren't exposing themselves to different cultures and different kinds of folks. And even, cis gay men, I say it all the time. It's like, because I have a lot of trans girlfriends, and I wouldn't be who I am without them. So I feel like everyone just needs to step outside of their box, speak up for other people, befriend other people. This is, it's been the time to do it, but now is even more of the time to do it.
Mm-hmm. And when you say like make a more diverse friend group, or how do we do this? These organizations and these places already exist. People are already doing the hard work. These nonprofits and advocacy organizations are already fighting and have been fighting for Black trans lives. And so if you want to help, or you want to expand your world, don't feel like you have to create a new one. There are people who have already been doing the hard work and having these conversations for a long time, so respect that also. We have so many questions, which I'm really actually excited about, so I'm gonna open it up. Let's see, I love this. Okay. So Jim is asking, Johnny, what are your thoughts of straight actors portraying gay characters versus gay actors doing those roles?
I think there's a big disparity in the amount of, one, there's not enough queer roles to begin with. And then to have straight men playing those characters. I as an artist, I'm like, the best person for the job should get it. But a lot of people, what they don't understand in the industry, it's not just about being the best. It's, your following. It's the billing that you're going to bring to the show. All of those things. And a lot of times they don't take chances on queer actors because they don't have the wealth of experience. Like, if Jake Gyllenhaal and Heath Ledger were in Brokeback Mountain, and that was a point in time, and it was very important and special, but had it been two queer actors that were not as well known, it probably wouldn't have gotten made. So I understand those business aspects, but I do, as a queer actor, I can only say that these stories mean something to me that they would not to a cis straight man. And that's not to say he wouldn't have empathy for playing a queer character. That's absolutely not true. But me telling my story means something to me because I remember some of the only representation I ever saw of myself were people like Pedro Zamora on The Real World San Francisco, and just looking for myself in media. So that's why it's important to me to play queer characters, because one, I deserve to play my forefathers and the people that are like me. I have a different sense of understanding, but yeah, I totally get straight men playing. But if there wasn't a disparity, then I'd say everyone, it's a free for all. But it's not at the moment, unfortunately.
Okay. Another question. Do you think there is currently a need for LGBT bookstores to exist? The chains and independents have sections, but not nearly as extensive with all the information that is now available. Ooh.
I mean, here's the thing also, going back to the conversation we had about finding friends that are unlike you. I've been to queer bookshops, and you see the people that are in there, and you talk to the person behind the counter, and that person becomes your friend because you go in looking for something, or what do you have this week? There's such a different feeling than when you go on Amazon and purchase a book. And look, I love me an Amazon book. There's nothing like getting a package and you're like, oh my God, I got it. But there's something to
support Green Apple.
Yeah, exactly. But there's something great about going in person and having that in-person feeling.
And the only thing I would add is